What's that? Out in space, it's a station with a T-Rex face, firing lasers and playing games and killing all those herbivores. Out beyond the atmosphere, he's collecting stuff and striking fear. Come on board and grab a beer for gameplay vids and retro cheer. T-Rex Space Station.
Hi guys, it's Ben here. How's everyone doing? So I've been watching quite a few videos recently on the subject of emulation, and I know you all have different opinions on this, but I thought it'd be something interesting for me to talk about myself. I think classically it's been considered that emulation isn't a pure form of showing video game footage, and so the purists among you may not be fans of this method. I think a lot of you want to see games in their original setting, played on the original consoles, so they look authentic, and you get to see authentic gameplay footage of how the game might play if you were to own it yourself. Now I should say that when I first started making my videos on YouTube, I did use a game capture card, but I hadn't really perfected the way to get good footage at that time, and I did dabble for a period using emulators. Now I only emulated games that I owned, so it was all legal as far as I could work out, and it did allow me to get very high quality footage. Now, to try and make it as true a gaming experience as I possibly could, I did use one of the USB converters, so I used my Sega Mega Drive pads. You know, the only difference was that it was on my computer rather than on the actual system itself. However, I did feel slightly guilty that this wasn't truly representative. It almost looks too good. It looks too smooth, too crisp, and not quite as fluffy as it might look on an actual TV from the console. So while I was doing that, I was constantly looking for ways to make it look, for ways to actually capture it from the Mega Drive to give me a slightly higher level of realism. And now I use the HDMI upscaler, which gives me a slightly better looking signal and a much more acceptable quality than I was getting previously. So now I don't use emulators anymore. But I can see the purpose of them, and so yes, the biggest purpose for me would be, as I said, if you want to record gameplay footage and capture gameplay footage, it's a very good and viable way of doing that, and I don't see why anyone could have any problem with you using an emulator to show your gameplay footage. You know, what you do in your own time to play the game is different from how you capture it, and you know, there are all sorts of limitations sometimes with trying to get good quality footage. And I know Steve Benway was talking about using EverDrives before and playing Sega Game Gear on his EverDrive. I don't have any issues with it. I think that you should do what's best for you to get good recording quality, and people should accept that you're trying your best to portray the game clearly. It's not always realistic to show it on the original hardware. For example, I've not really attempted to try and record my tiny Game Boy screen. I've never done that. And I think for handhelds it's definitely an easier option to just show an emulator. You can get it much bigger, much clearer, much better, much more easy to show. Everyone knows that the original Game Boys weren't backlit. Those buggers are really hard to see at the best of times, never mind to see and record. So yeah, that's the other big place where I would say emulation is good. It's if you want to help record difficult consoles or small consoles, handheld consoles. So yeah, I think that emulation has its time and its place, but that I would prefer real footage if possible. But I just don't have any sort of strong feelings either way, really. Now, Pete Dorr recently did a video talking about emulation. He said that he doesn't like to use emulators. The biggest part for him was that he likes to collect video games. He likes to own the actual hard copies, and part of the collection is part of the fun. And certainly if you start just using emulators, you take that away. It's very easy to download, say, the entire Sega Master System or Sega Mega Drive library in very small number of minutes, and you're then left with a very overwhelming number of titles. And personally, I think this is one of the other downsides of emulation and EverDrives and just having digital copies. You can obtain so many games so fast that it almost devalues them, and I get that kind of too much choice paralysis, where it's like, well, there are so many options here, I don't actually know which one I'll play, and end up just playing none of them because I'm just spoilt for choice. Whereas, due to the limitations and the time that has to go into buying a game online, you do a bit more research, you got to spend money, you got to collect the game, you got to get the parcel through the mail. You tend to savour those games a little bit more, and physical copies are much more appreciated and will tend to get played a bit more. That said, there are a large number of us who still get gameplay paralysis because we've got so many bloody physical copies anyway, so maybe that argument isn't completely valid. But I can see Pete's point on that issue. But here, him talking about wanting physical copies of things and liking part of the collection did bring me on to thinking a bit about digital media as well, and I have touched on this in the past. You know, we spoke on the Retro and Limb live stream on Friday about digitalization and digital media and not having physical copies of things anymore, and I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about a bit, because it's different for me for different things. For video games, I am very firmly in the camp of I like to collect the real physical copies and own the games. And you know, I've never had like big libraries of digital games on, say, you know, the Wii Store, where you could buy NES games, N64 games, even Super Famicom games, I believe, and collect those. But you know, you never actually have a physical copy of it. And you know, I think one of the big downsides we all saw of that was when things went upgraded to the Wii U. People couldn't transfer their games across the new system. You're basically trapped. You know, you're forced to enjoy those games how someone else tells you to. Whereas as long as I've got the cartridge here of a game, I can always play it on my console without any permission, without any difficulty. It is an interesting question: what happens to your digital media once once the platform that supplied it to you disappears? You know, should Steam go down, for example, what will happen to all those games that I have on there? Now, Steam is one of the only sort of digital stores, that and Good Old Games, I suppose, where I have actually bought digital copies rather than physical copies. And I suppose that's for a few reasons. One, because they tend to be very cheap, cheaper than buying a normal copy. And two, there's a lot of indie games and things on there that you can't really buy in proper boxes, like physical copies. And you know, I think it's a really cool idea to disseminate games cheaply and quickly. But you know, I wouldn't be happy about playing full price for just a digital game. The only time I've ever done that was with Diablo 3, and that was a kind of exception to the rule that I wouldn't really relive. You know, if I'm paying full price, I want something that's mine, that I can have, that I can keep, that I can look after, and that I can use endlessly, with no limitations, and not having to be dictated to by a certain type of mainframe like Steam, for example. But it's funny because I think our idea of, in terms of music, has changed a lot recently. I remember reading an article about pirating music, and the guy that wrote it, I think it was on the Guardian website, said, you know, people don't have a problem with downloading music these days because they don't see it as theft, because our idea of what it is to own music is completely different. We don't feel as though we do own music anymore. I think that's because of the widespread use of sort of you know, streaming media websites like Spotify and things like that. Or even just YouTube. Music is something to be enjoyed, but the idea of owning albums is changing a lot, especially for, so let's say, the younger generations now that are just getting into music and Spotify and the internet and things. It's all very, very different. When I was a teenager, I used to save up and buy albums, and I have got a drawer full of old CDs here, which is, you know, it's really cool. It's my collection, and it tells kind of a story of where I was at the time, what I was listening to. But I've not bought a physical album for a long time, probably a number of years. And that's because it's just become kind of obsolete. It's not space efficient, it's not time efficient. I much prefer just to use my Spotify subscription, where I pay a $5 and I can listen to whatever I want and don't actually own anything. So it's funny how my attitudes towards music are actually quite different to my attitudes towards video games and emulation and digital copies and all that type of thing. I don't know particularly what the difference is between the two, it's just the way that I kind of feel. And I feel similarly towards books as well. I know a lot of people use Kindles, they download loads and loads of different digital books on there and read them on there, but for me, somehow books still seem sacred. You know, I don't know why that is, but I kind of stick just to wanting a physical copy. But I agree there are benefits to having just digital books. You know, for example, if you're going travelling, you're not going to have space in your suitcase for 10 different books, are you? But you could easily fit loads and loads of them on your Kindle. So, I don't know, maybe over time my ideas towards books and digital books will change as well. But again, I wouldn't be happy paying full book price for what's essentially a couple of 100 kilobytes of data. I think the big advantage of actually owning physical copies of video games, books and CDs is kind of enjoying the artwork. And that's especially apparent if you're a vinyl collector, you know, with really big sleeves, and lots of effort went into the artwork on those. And I think that will always be superior to a digital collection of music. You know, my friend does have a vinyl collection. Sometimes I go around to his place and drink a bit of wine, and we get vinyls out, we look at the sleeves, we put them on. It's just more of a, I don't know, more of an experience in terms of, you know, the artwork and a tangible album than just having something digital. But yeah, I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on this. Are you for or against digital downloading games and not owning physical copies? Do you have a big Google Play account, or a big Steam collection, or even a big Nintendo Wii collection on the Wii store that you now can't play on your Wii U? And what do you think about digital music and downloading books, digital books? repeating other people's videos about emulation got me thinking about all this sort of stuff. It's kind of interesting. Alright guys, let me know what you think, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.